making beads from beer and soda cans for a while now, and I'm excited to share my newest bead styles with you today. I'm going to be starting this tutorial with my beads already pre-cut into the strips. So if you need some additional information on how to work with the cans, flatten them, cut them, you can cut them on your Cricut cutting machine or by hand. And if you need to get caught up on any of that information, I have a lot of tutorials on my YouTube channel for all of those topics. So just know that this might seem like it's starting in the middle of a project if you haven't made any beads from the aluminum cans before, but I have a couple of other bead rolling tutorials that I will also throw links in the description box if you need to get caught up to where we are right now. Also, depending on when you're watching this, I am working on putting all of my information in a more cohesive, linear way to follow. And so I'm throwing that all into sort of a mini course that I'm working on right now. And depending on when you're watching this video, it may or may not be available, but that will eventually be another resource for you if you'd like to work more with aluminum cans. So as I mentioned, you can cut the aluminum by hand or on a Cricut cutting machine, and I'm going to be using this one singular template. It actually comes in 3 sections, but the pieces fit together to make one long taper. So you can see that these pieces are all the same size. They're the middle section, and then the other 2 templates have a wide and a pointed tip to them. I've gone ahead and I've already cut my pieces from the aluminum sheets on my Cricut cutting machine. And when you cut on the Cricut cutting machine, you'll notice that the pieces don't come completely apart. So you do still kind of have to weed them out. But this is what I was talking about. So these middle sections fit together, and you'll notice that this is tapering down and this one is getting wider, and then this piece fits up here. And to work with the aluminum, if you've cut it on your Cricut cutting machine, you just need to kind of snap the pieces apart along the score line that your machine has made. If you're cutting them by hand, obviously you will just kind of adhere your template to the aluminum and then cut with a regular pair of scissors. But if you do use your Cricut cutting machine, you'll notice that you can just snap the pieces into sections. So while I'm only using one template or 3 sections of a single template, I did want to show you that there are a lot of different bead styles that you can make from this one template. The first one is what I'm calling my small round bead. And it's made by just using the smallest tapered piece, just one section from the template. So I'm going to go ahead and split that off. And then I need to cut a small piece of metal tape. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you know how much I love this tape. It is just a really fun tape, especially when you're working with the aluminum cans. So I just have a little piece cut here, and this is just the width of the tape, which is 2 inches. And I'm going to cut a small tapered strip to finish the pointed piece of my aluminum here. So I want it fairly narrow, and I just want to cut to the width of my piece of aluminum. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can trim the tape afterwards if you need to. And then because this tape has some paper backing on it, I'm just going to peel back a small portion, maybe 1/2 inch. And I'm going to adhere the tape to the tip of my aluminum strip. And then I want to leave the paper on the back there. Now, if you've cut this bit too wide, you can go back and trim it off with your scissors if you need to. This piece is actually cut pretty well, so I'm just going to leave it as is. And then the next thing I want to do is I need to start the coil. If you've ever rolled paper beads, you know that the paper just rolls right up, but this aluminum will fight back a little bit. So I'm going to use a wooden skewer or dowel just to curve the wide end of my bead, or of my strip. I just want to roll it a couple of times. And then I need to tighten this up so that it will fit on the bead roller properly. So I want to make sure that I'm kind of squeezing it and rolling it. You want to keep it as uniform as possible. And then I recommend using this bead roller. I've done a review of this bead roller. I've talked about this bead roller in a lot of videos. It's made by Green Creativity, and I really like it for the aluminum cans because it has this little pressure plate on it which helps you hold the aluminum in place, and this handle which allows you to kind of handle the material differently than if you're using a more traditional bead roller. Now for this bead, there's not a lot of metal, so you might be able to roll it on a more traditional bead roller or quilling, what do they call them? Quilling tool, sure. But if you're just starting to work with the aluminum or you haven't rolled a lot of beads, I would definitely recommend using this bead roller to start with. So I'm going to slip the coil that I've rolled between these two barrels, and as long as I've rolled it fairly tight, it should grip and you should be able to roll the bead as you turn the handle. Now you want to try to keep it kind of lined up, and if you haven't rolled your original coil evenly, your bead might want to roll kind of crooked, and so you're going to need to kind of adjust as you're rolling and try to get that first coil nice and uniform. So I'm just going to roll it till I get to the end of the metal and up to where my tape is, and then I can just remove that paper and finish rolling the bead. And then I can push down on my little pressure plate and slide the bead off. Now, because of the way that this bead roller works, you can see that this is sort of a more oval shape and not quite as round as you might want it. And if you want to, you can use a pair of pliers just to kind of pinch it back into more of a rounded shape. You don't want to overwork the metal because it is a little brittle, but you can reshape it. And then you've got a rounder bead shape. Now you'll also notice that on these beads, because of the way that they fit onto these two barrels, you're not going to have a nice clean hole in the bead. And I don't worry about that right away because of I'm going to put a sealer on these, and I just want to put a toothpick in here. And so I don't want the hole to be too big yet. I want it to stay tight on my toothpick while I'm putting the sealer and on there. So once that's done, you can go back in and kind of push the metal out to make a more uniform hole, and you can just use a toothpick or something like that. But I'm not going to do that right now because I want to just slide this onto my toothpick so that I can add the sealer. Another bead that you can make with this template is what I call my small oval bead, and it is made with the middle section and the small section of the template. So you're going to just put two pieces together. So I'm going to break off my middle section of the template. And a smaller section of the template. And then I need to cut a piece of my metal tape to attach these two pieces together. Now you can measure them. I just kind of eyeball it and trim the excess tape off once I have the pieces taped together. So I'm going to peel back half of my paper and stick it to the aluminum side of my taper here. And then I want to go ahead and just attach this second piece. I want to just butt the two pieces together. I'm not going to overlap them. I just want to put them right end to end and tack down the tape. And then you can go back and trim off the tape. And if you need to, sometimes your pieces don't line up perfectly, especially if you're cutting them by hand. So you can always trim off the excess metal as well, just to make sure your taper is nice and smooth. If you do that, you're going to want to have something to catch your little metal shards in so you don't lose track of them. And so you can just easily clean up those edges if you need to. And then again, I need to cut a little 2-inch strip that's tapered for the tip of my bead. And I'm only gonna peel back a little bit of this tape and attach it to the tip here. And I want to leave the paper on again. Now, if I just roll this singular strip, I'm going to get this kind of oval shaped bead. But I want to make sort of a more rounded bead. And so what I'm going to do, these two beads are using the same template. But to make the round bead instead of the oval bead, I need to use a second strip. So when you're using two strips together, you want to double check. These should be the same width at the bottom, and these are pretty close. If you do end up with one that's a little bit wider than the other one, then you want to start with that strip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, they're the same size, so it doesn't really matter which one I'm using, but I'm going to go ahead and start my coil around the skewer just like I did with the smaller bead. I want to tighten it up, and the wider that your bead gets, the slightly more careful you want to be about making this first coil, because you want to keep it uniform from side to side as much as you can. And once you've gotten it tightened to about the size of the barrel of your bead roller, you can go ahead and slide it onto the bead roller. And I'm going to roll this about 4 times. And once I have the first strip securely wound onto my bead roller a couple of 3 or 4 times, I'm going to slide this next piece down in front. You want to keep the printed side facing you on both of the strips. And I'm going to let a little pressure off with my finger here just to sort of slide this down into the coil. And then you can turn the handle, and you want to make sure that you're getting this second strip caught into the bead so that it will they will roll together. And what this does is it keeps your outside strip a little bit narrower than the inside strip so that your bead will roll and look more uniform. So you want to keep the strips lined up, and you want to keep this bead adjusted as much as you can so that the taper is rolling into the middle of the bead. You can do a little bit of adjusting after you take the bead off of the bead roller, but it's best if you can kind of keep it uniform while you're rolling the bead. The other thing about this bead roller, because of this little pressure plate, is that there is a maximum amount of bead size that you can actually put onto this bead roller, and that max is about 3.5 pieces of metal strips. And since I've got 4 on here, I'm gonna kind of max out the amount of aluminum that I can roll onto here. So as I'm getting to the end here, I want to not max out my bead roller too much. So I'm going to go ahead and take this shorter strip and remove the paper from the tape, and I just want to attach the tape to that bottom strip. And then I'm going to carefully remove the bead from this bead roller. So I want to hold it tight so that I don't lose the coil, and I'm pushing down on the pressure plate to slide it off. So now I'm going to go to a more traditional bead roller. They look like similar to this. This one's a handmade one, but they come in different sizes and they're pretty affordable. And the good thing about them is that you can certainly roll your bead as fat as you want to. So I'm going to slide it into my bead, and then keeping it tight, I'm going to go ahead and roll the final bit of metal stripping around here. And when I get to the tape, I'm just going to remove the backing again and roll the tape around my bead. And then remove it from the bead roller carefully so that you're not pulling the bead sections out. And if you need to, like I said, you can kind of shift the coils around a little bit if you want to reshape your bead a little. Now with this size bead, I have not had a problem of it popping open, but as you'll see on the next bead, the more metal you have, the more pressure there is on the tape. So if you have a problem with the beads popping open, you can add another little skinny strip of tape. And then when you add the sealer, that helps to hold the bead as well as fill in some of the gaps and just give it a nicer finish, but it also will add some stability to holding the bead together. So for the final bead, I'm going to be using all 3 pieces of the taper, and if you roll them, you get a similar bead to the smaller oval, which is just the 2 pieces. So this is what I call my large oval bead, and as I said, if you roll just a single strip, you'll get the oval shape. But I want to do a more rounded shape, so I'm going to be using 2 pieces again, just like we did in the last bead. So I need the biggest piece of my taper, and I need a middle piece, and I want a small piece. And again, I'm just going to use the metal tape to attach all 3 pieces together and to add a 2-inch tapered piece to the tip. Sorry, I meant to mention this earlier, but if you'd like to use my bead templates, I will put a link to them in the description box. So you can print out the PDF to cut them by hand or the SVG to use your Cricut cutting machine. So again, if you're rolling just one strip, you're going to get an sort of a large oval bead. And you can go ahead and roll this bead entirely on the Green Creativity bead roller because there's only 3 strips of metal. But I'm going to go ahead and make the more rounded shape here. So I'm going to add a second strip that I've already taped together. And I want to check the ends just to make sure that if I have one that's larger, again, these are pretty close together. But you do want to be sure to check just in case you do have one that's larger. You want that one on the bead roller first. So I'm just going to start the coil again. And again, this bead is getting wider at the bottom, so just make sure that you're making your coil as uniform as you can so that the bead will roll more straightly and more uniformly. So once I have my coil tightened, I'm going to slide it onto the bead roller, and I'm going to turn 4 full turns. Make sure everything's lined up. And again, I will slide my second bead strip in front here. You just need to get it in there far enough for it to catch. And you want to make sure you're getting it in there straight. Mine wants to kind of kick off to the side here a little bit. Now with this bead, we're going to have to remove it from the bead roller sooner than we did the other bead, because I've got 6 pieces of metal on here. And as I said, 3.5 kind of maxes out the bead roller. So as you feel the bead roller kind of getting tighter, you want to use this bead roller for as much of the bead as you can, but you don't want to get the bead on there so tightly that you can't release it to get it off of the bead roller. So you can see I'm getting close to my max capacity here. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully remove the bead from the bead roller. Now this is what I'm talking about though. You can actually hold this bead with one hand. It doesn't unwind as a more traditional bead roller would. So it just helps you really stabilize the bead because you are working with a material that is a little more difficult to work with than paper. So again, I want to hold the bead tightly. I'm going to gently pull it off the bead roller, trying not to pull the inside coils out. And then I'm going to put my handheld bead roller in there. You will want to find a bead roller that matches the size of this Green Creativity bead roller. Like I said, they do come in different sizes, so just make sure you have a size that's compatible so that you can switch back and forth here. And see, you see what I'm saying? When I let loose of this, it just unwinds, which the Green Creativity bead roller does not do. So I'm going to go ahead and continue rolling. Now, like I said, you could try to roll this entire bead with this handheld bead roller, but I think it would be a little bit of a challenge. Once you have part of the bead rolled from this Green Creativity bead roller, you have a much better ability to kind of hold on to the bead as you're rolling it. And so I think using the combination works pretty well. All right, so I'm pretty much to the end of my shorter strip. I'm going to remove the paper backing of my tape. Just let this piece of tape adhere to my longer strip, and I'm going to keep rolling. So once I've finished rolling the bead, I'm going to go ahead and take it carefully off the bead roller again. But these beads have definitely had a tendency to pop open because there's quite a lot of pressure from all of the coils, and there's a very thin piece of tape holding all of that together. So I like to take a second tapered strip, and these I cut a little bit longer. You probably want like about a 3-inch piece of tape, and you can see that the bead will hold. It's not like it's going to pop open immediately, but just because I've had some of them pop open, I like to go ahead and put this additional strip on here, and I know that it's going to go all the way around and add a little bit of stability to the bead here. The other thing you might want to consider is putting a second coat of sealer on these, just because there is so much metal in them and they are the tape is under some pressure. So that is the large round bead. So you can see from this one template, you can make several different beads. If you use all three tapers, you can roll an oval bead, or you can double up on the strips and roll a rounder bead. Similarly, you can roll just the two smaller strips and get a smaller oval bead, or double up on the strips and get a round bead. And then the last bead was just the single tapered strip that gave us this small round bead. So when I'm finishing the beads, as I said, I like to put my beads onto some toothpicks, and there are probably a lot of sealers that you could use, but I like to use this Mod Podge Super Gloss. There's a couple reasons that I prefer this product, and one of them is that it's extra thick, so it doesn't drip at all. I'm sure you could use regular Mod Podge as well, but this Super Gloss is just extra thick, and so I think it adds a little bit of a thicker finish to the beads, and it also is an adhesive. So that's another reason that I like to use the Mod Podge, because again, you want to do everything you can to kind of secure these beads and make sure that they're not going to pop open. So I just have a dedicated brush that I use, and I just quickly brush on a coat of the Mod Podge. Again, for these larger beads, you might want to throw a second coat on, and then you can just stake them into some styrofoam or whatever you have to allow them to dry. And I've done a whole tutorial on sealing and coloring the beads. There are some different products that you can use, and I cover that in a separate video, so you can check that out if you're interested. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to check the description box for additional resources and to sign up to receive the Upcycle Design Lab newsletter. You can join my YouTube community by clicking that subscribe button, or watch more upcycling content by clicking the link below. And if it's not available when you're watching this video, check back for my detailed all-in-one mini course on everything I've learned about working with aluminum drink cans.